"Apologize to my ex in front of my son, right here, or I'll divorce you tonight," my husband snapped. I smiled, reached into my purse, and slid a signed packet across the dining table. Jason made it to page 4 before the color drained from his face. He reached behind him for his chair, missed it the first time, then dropped into the seat like his knees had stopped working. His wife, Emily, leaned toward him. "What is it?" Jason didn't answer. Mark was still standing at the head of the table, one palm pressed flat against the wood. His reading glasses rested beside his plate, and there was a streak of gravy on the cuff of the blue shirt I had ironed that morning. Linda, his ex-wife, held her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Nobody moved. The pot roast I'd spent 4 hours making sat between us, getting cold. That was the moment they finally realized I had not come to Sunday dinner to surrender. But to understand why my husband had gathered his ex-wife, his son, his sister, and his daughter-in-law around my dining table to demand an apology from me, you need to know what being married to Mark Bennett had been like. Not at the beginning. The beginning was lovely. I met Mark when I was 47 at a retirement seminar in downtown Indianapolis. I worked in payroll and benefits for a medical device company, so I was there professionally. Mark was a commercial insurance broker who had been invited to speak about long-term care coverage. He was confident without being loud, funny without trying too hard. Afterward, he found me near the coffee station and said, "You were the only person in that room who looked more interested in the fine print than the free cookies." I told him the cookies were stale. He said, "Then dinner is the least I can do." I had been widowed for 5 years by then. My first husband, Tom, died after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. We never had children, and after he died, I got used to living alone in the condo we'd bought in Broad Ripple. I told myself I was content. Mostly, I was afraid to build another life and lose it. Mark seemed safe. He had one grown son, Jason, and an ex-wife named Linda. He spoke proudly about how they had remained a close family after the divorce. At the time, I thought that showed maturity. I didn't understand that in Mark's family, staying close meant Linda kept the status of a wife while I slowly inherited the responsibilities. At holidays, Linda took over the kitchen without asking. At Mark's birthday dinner, she sat beside him because, as she once explained, "That's where I've always sat." Jason called me when he needed help reviewing insurance paperwork, watching the grandchildren, or calculating payroll taxes for one of his business ideas. But when he introduced me to friends, I was always Dad's wife. Never Claire, never family. There were little things, too. The kind that sound petty when you repeat them out loud. A family Christmas photo where Linda stood beside Mark and I was asked to hold the phone. A framed picture from Jason's college graduation that included Mark and Linda, placed on the mantel after mine, and Mark's wedding portrait was moved to the hallway. A birthday card signed, "From all of us," though nobody had remembered to include my name. Whenever I said something, Mark gave me the same tired response. "Don't make everything into a competition," so I learned to keep quiet. That afternoon, the Sunday everything broke open, I had taken 2 ibuprofen for my knee and started dinner before noon. I browned the roast in my Dutch oven, peeled potatoes, made green beans with bacon, and drove to Meijer for rolls because Mark said Jason liked that particular brand. By 6:30, everyone had arrived. Linda brought wine, but no food. Carol, Mark's older sister, brought a pecan pie and immediately asked whether I had enough whipped cream. Jason and Emily came in with their 2 children, who ran upstairs to watch a movie before I'd even taken their coats. The reason for the dinner, supposedly, was Jason's plan to buy Henderson Lawn and Landscape, a small company in Fishers. The owner was retiring, and Jason had spent months talking about how the business would finally give him something of his own. I had wished him well. What I had not done was agree to finance it. 3 days before dinner, a loan officer had called me at work and asked whether I intended to make my separate retirement account available as part of a family liquidity plan. I thought he had the wrong Claire Bennett. He didn't. When I asked Mark about it, he barely looked up from his phone. "It's preliminary paperwork." "My retirement account is not preliminary paperwork. Nobody is taking your money." "Then why is my name on Jason's loan file?" Mark sighed as if I had asked him to explain electricity. Because banks want to see the whole family picture, that's all. I asked Jason the same question over the phone. He said, "Dad told me you were fine with helping." I never said that. There was a pause. Then Jason replied, "Well, you know how much this means to us." Us. That word did a lot of work in Mark's family. At dinner, Linda raised the subject before we had finished the salad. She said Jason had been deeply embarrassed by my phone call. "I don't think you understand how humiliating it is to question a man's honesty when he's trying to provide for his children." I set down my fork. I asked why my property appeared in paperwork I'd never seen. Jason shook his head. "You made it sound like I was stealing from you." I asked a question. "You accused my son," Linda said. Mark had been quiet until then. That should have warned me. He folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and said, "Claire, this has gone far enough." I looked at him. What has? "You embarrassed Linda, you embarrassed Jason, you turned a family opportunity into some kind of investigation." Emily stared at her plate. Carol murmured, "Maybe everybody should just calm down." Linda leaned back in my chair, the chair I always used at the table, and waited. Mark stood. "Apologize to my ex in front of my son, right here, or I'll divorce you tonight." For 1 second, I almost did it. That is the part people leave out when they tell stories about finally standing up for themselves. They make courage sound clean. Mine wasn't. I looked at Mark's face and remembered him sleeping in a hospital recliner after my knee surgery. I remembered our trip to Traverse City when we got lost and laughed until we cried. I remembered Sunday mornings when he brought me coffee before the rest of the family started calling. I did love him. And at 55, leaving wasn't just heartbreak. It was health insurance, legal fees, moving boxes, mortgage rates, and wondering who would drive me home if I ever needed another procedure. My hand shook when I reached into my purse. Mark mistook that for fear. His expression softened just a little. He thought I was reaching for a tissue. Instead, I pulled out the cream-colored envelope my attorney had prepared and placed the packet in front of him. "You don't have to threaten me with divorce," I said. "I came prepared." Mark glanced at the first page and gave a short laugh. Jason reached across the table and took it from him. Page 1 was a signed settlement proposal. Page 2 listed my separate assets. Page 3 withdrew any consent, spoken, implied, or otherwise, for my property to be used in connection with Jason's business purchase. Then Jason turned to page 4. His face went white. Emily touched his arm. "Jason?" I looked directly at Mark. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell them why my dead husband's retirement account appears on your son's loan application." 11 weeks before that dinner, I was sitting at my desk in Indianapolis, trying to finish payroll before lunch, when my office phone rang. "Mrs. Bennett? This is Claire." "My name is Daniel Foster with Hoosier Community Bank. I just need to verify a couple of items related to a pending commercial acquisition." I frowned. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person." There was a short pause while he looked at whatever was on his screen. "This concerns Henderson Lawn and Landscape." Jason. I relaxed a little. "Oh, you probably need my husband." "I apologize if I'm mistaken," he said carefully. "Our file indicates you'll be participating in the family's liquidity support." I blinked. "The family's what?" Another pause. "I may have called before all parties were informed." He suddenly sounded uncomfortable. "I think it's best if you discuss the matter with the primary applicants." Before I could ask another question, he politely ended the call. For the next hour, I tried convincing myself it had been a misunderstanding. Banks mixed up paperwork. People misunderstood conversations. Maybe Mark had simply mentioned that we were financially comfortable. Still, something about the loan officer's voice stayed with me. Not what he said, what he stopped saying. That evening, Mark was watching the local news with his feet on the coffee table when I brought it up. "Did Jason put my name on something for his business loan?" He didn't even look away from the television. "They're collecting information." "They asked if I planned to support the purchase." "They ask everybody that." I've never agreed to support anything." Mark sighed. "Claire." He muted the television. "They just want to see the entire financial picture." "My retirement account isn't part of Jason's financial picture." "Nobody's taking your retirement." "Then why did the bank think otherwise?" He smiled the same patient smile people use with frightened children. "You're making yourself anxious over preliminary paperwork." Maybe I wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than admitting I might have married someone who could casually volunteer my future without asking. For a few days, I let it go, or at least I pretended to. But once doubt finds a place to sit, it doesn't leave quietly. It follows you through grocery stores, it keeps you awake at 3 a.m, it rides beside you on your commute. I was 55. Starting over wasn't just an emotional decision anymore. It meant calculating health insurance before Medicare. It meant wondering whether I could still retire at 63 like Tom and I had planned. It meant moving furniture with a knee that already complained every time rain was in the forecast. One night, I woke at 3:12. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming downstairs. I wrapped a heating pad around my right knee, put on my reading glasses, and sat at the kitchen island with a mug of chamomile tea. I opened our online accounts. Nothing obvious looked wrong. No missing money, no mysterious withdrawals. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking in the wrong place. The answer found me 2 Saturdays later. I needed directions to a physical therapy clinic, so I printed them from the computer in Mark's home office. The printer coughed twice before my page appeared. Beneath it sat several sheets someone had forgotten to collect. Normally, I would have set them aside without looking. Instead, one phrase caught my eye: household asset summary. I shouldn't have read another line. I know that. But my own name appeared halfway down the page. So did the address of our Carmel house. I slowly lifted the stack. There was a draft financial statement, a cover letter addressed to Hoosier Community Bank, an asset schedule, and an unsigned document titled Spousal Acknowledgement. None of it bore my signature. Yet page after page described our household as though certain assets would soon become available to support Jason's purchase. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. My Broad Ripple condo. Not the condo itself, I had sold it 2 years earlier, but the brokerage account funded by those proceeds. It was listed under Available Family Resources. Below that, Tom's retirement account. My late husband's retirement account. It wasn't being transferred, it hadn't been pledged. But the paperwork suggested those funds would become part of the family's combined financial strength after future consolidation. Future consolidation? Nobody had ever discussed consolidating anything. I carefully photographed every page with my phone. Then I placed the originals exactly where I'd found them. When Mark came downstairs 20 minutes later, he kissed my forehead and asked if I wanted pancakes. I looked at him and wondered how many conversations he'd had about my future without me sitting in the room. I decided not to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I asked casually over breakfast, "So, did you tell Jason's lender we'd be combining more of our finances?" His knife stopped spreading strawberry jam for the briefest second. Then it started moving again. I said we're in good shape. "Did you mention my brokerage account?" He shrugged. "They asked general questions." "Did you answer them?" He looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm asking." "And I'm answering." "No, Mark." I held his eyes. "You're avoiding." His expression hardened. "This is exactly why I didn't want to drag you into every detail." That sentence landed harder than he realized. Didn't want to drag me into every detail, not because it was complicated, because it was easier if I didn't know. The following Tuesday, I drove to downtown Indianapolis during my lunch break and met with Rachel Mendoza. Denise, my sister, had insisted. "You don't need a divorce lawyer yet," she'd told me. "You need someone who can tell you whether you're imagining things." Rachel spent nearly an hour reviewing the photographs on my phone. She never interrupted. When she finally looked up, her voice stayed calm. "Claire, From what I'm seeing, nobody has legally taken your assets. I felt myself breathe again, but there was always a but. These documents strongly suggest your husband has represented your future cooperation as though it's already guaranteed. So I'm not crazy. No, she folded her hands. You're also not overreacting. Rachel explained that the bank paperwork alone didn't necessarily mean fraud. Drafts changed. Applications evolved. People made assumptions. But assumptions became dangerous when everyone acted as though consent had already been given. Her advice was simple. Don't sign anything. Move my paycheck into an account only I controlled. Freeze my credit. Collect documents. Stay calm. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses. Claire, has your husband been encouraging you to combine everything? I nodded. For years. And if you had? I already knew the answer. Jason's business would have had access to far more than anyone had ever admitted. As I stood to leave, Rachel slid one photocopied page back across the desk. Keep this with you. I glanced down. It was page 4. Near the bottom sat Jason's signature beneath a certification stating that the listed family support had been disclosed with the owner's knowledge. Rachel tapped the signature with one finger. When he realizes you never approved any of this, she said quietly, this is the page that's going to terrify him. I slipped it back into my folder. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wondering whether I was imagining the problem. I was deciding how to protect myself before anyone else could decide my future for me. Jason kept staring at the paper. Emily leaned closer, trying to read over his shoulder. Jason? He swallowed once before answering. Dad. That was all he managed. Mark reached for the packet, but Jason held onto it. What is it? Linda asked impatiently. Jason didn't answer her either. I watched my husband instead. He still believed he could talk his way out of this. Claire, he said with an irritated sigh, you're making a scene over preliminary paperwork? No, I replied evenly. The scene started when you demanded I apologize for asking why my dead husband's retirement account appeared in your son's loan documents. Emily's eyes snapped toward Mark. What retirement account? Mark ignored her. He looked directly at Jason. Give me the papers. Jason didn't move. Instead, he looked back down at page 4. His lips moved silently as he read the certification a second time. Then he whispered, and almost to himself, I signed this. Emily gently took the packet from him. She read until she reached the paragraph Rachel had pointed out during our meeting. Her expression changed almost immediately. She looked at Jason. You told them she knew? Jason rubbed both hands across his face. It wasn't like that, I finally spoke. Then tell us what it was like. Nobody interrupted. Jason looked exhausted. Dad told me, he began. Dad told me you'd already agreed to help. He said the paperwork just hadn't caught up yet. Linda frowned. What are you talking about? Mark answered before Jason could. I told him we'd support family. No, I said quietly. You told him I'd already agreed. Mark's jaw tightened. You're twisting my words. I don't have to. I reached into my purse again. I brought something else. I placed my phone on the table. I don't secretly record people. I never have. I tapped the screen. But sometimes people leave themselves evidence. A voicemail began playing through the speaker. Mark's voice filled the dining room. Jason, don't bring up the loan application at dinner. Claire doesn't need every detail until the bank's ready. Once everything's finalized, she'll understand why we handled it this way. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Mark stared at the phone as though he'd never seen it before. Finally, he muttered, I called the wrong number. You did, I said. You meant to call Jason. Emily slowly lowered the packet. You knew she didn't know. Mark tried to recover. It wasn't a lie. It absolutely was, Emily said. I was waiting for the right time. The right time? I asked. After my accounts had already become part of Jason's financing. No, his voice rose. Nobody was stealing your money. I never said you were. You keep acting like I emptied your bank account. I said you volunteered assets that weren't yours to volunteer. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Across the table, Carol finally spoke. Maybe this is all just a misunderstanding. I looked at her. Carol, if someone told a bank your retirement savings would probably become available next month, would you call that a misunderstanding? She looked down into her coffee. I suppose not. Linda was still staring at Mark. You told me Jason's financing was already secure. It was supposed to be. That's not what I asked. Her voice had changed. Quieter, sharper. You told me Claire had already agreed. Mark hesitated. I assumed she would. Linda laughed once. There wasn't any humor in it. So that's why you wanted me here. He frowned. What? You wanted me to pressure her. Nobody denied it, because nobody could. Linda slowly picked up her wine glass before setting it back down untouched. You let me spend 20 minutes criticizing this woman over something you knew she hadn't agreed to. I was trying to avoid unnecessary conflict. I couldn't help it. A short laugh escaped me. Everyone looked at me. I'm sorry, I said. It's just... I shook my head. I've never heard blackmail described as conflict avoidance. Even Emily covered her mouth to hide a smile. Mark pointed at me. There it is. What? That attitude. No, Mark. I leaned back in my chair. This is the first honest conversation we've had in months. Jason suddenly pushed his chair back. Dad! His voice cracked. If the bank finds out she never approved this... I answered before Mark could. They already will. Every head turned toward me. What? Mark said. I gave you until tomorrow morning. I slid another page across the table. Rachel's letter. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't threatening. It simply stated that I had never authorized the use of my separate assets, had never agreed to act as a guarantor, and requested that the lender correct any inaccurate assumptions before proceeding. The letter goes out at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Jason looked sick. My deposit, I nodded. The bank may ask for additional documentation. He buried his face in his hands. I already paid $42,000. Emily stared at him. You told me it wasn't at risk. I didn't think... No, she interrupted. You didn't. Mark slammed his palm on the table. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. I looked at him. No, I kept my voice calm. You were trying to prevent me from finding out. Silence. The kind that fills an entire room. Finally, Mark said the one sentence I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. You could have helped if you'd really loved this family. For a second, that hurt more than everything else. Because part of me still wanted him to choose me, still wanted him to say he was sorry, still wanted this dinner to end with everyone hugging and pretending none of it had happened. Instead, I realized something. He wasn't defending the marriage. He was defending access to my savings, my retirement, my future. I slowly stood. My right knee protested after sitting so long, and I steadied myself against the back of the chair. Mark noticed. His expression softened just a little. Claire! You know what's strange? I said. I spent weeks wondering whether I'd been too suspicious. I picked up my purse. I lost sleep. I questioned myself. I worried I was becoming one of those people who sees problems everywhere. I looked around the table. It turns out I wasn't suspicious enough. I headed toward the front door. Behind me, Mark called my name. Where are you going? I opened the door. To my sister's house. We're not finished. I turned back one last time. No, I looked at Jason. Your lender and my attorney will finish this tomorrow. Then I looked at Mark. And whether our marriage survives tonight is no longer your decision. I stepped outside into the warm Indiana evening. The sun had almost disappeared, but the air still smelled like fresh-cut grass. I had barely reached my car when I heard the front door open behind me. Claire! It was Emily. She hurried across the driveway, clutching her purse against her side. I need to tell you something, she said, out of breath. It's about the loan. She hesitated. And It's worse than you think. Emily didn't stop until she reached my car. The porch light behind her threw long shadows across the driveway, and for a second she looked almost as shaken as Jason. Claire, please don't leave yet. I've heard enough for one night. I know, but you need to hear this. She glanced back toward the house to make sure nobody had followed her. I only found out part of it last week. My hand stayed on the car door. Found out what? Emily took a slow breath. Jason didn't just put down the $42,000 deposit. I frowned. What do you mean? He borrowed $25,000 against our home equity line to make the deal work. I stared at her. He told me your money would replace that risk once everything closed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Emily looked embarrassed. I believed him because, honestly, I believed your husband. So did I said quietly. She nodded, eyes filling with tears. I don't think Jason ever expected you to say, no. Mark kept telling him this was just temporary. Temporary. That word seemed to excuse everything in Mark's world. Temporary lies, temporary pressure, temporary silence. I thanked Emily for telling me and drove straight to my sister Denise's house in Greenwood. I didn't sleep much. Not because I doubted my decision anymore, because I knew what tomorrow would change. At exactly 8:55 Monday morning, I sat across from Rachel Mendoza in her office overlooking Monument Circle. She reviewed the final letter one last time. No accusations, she said. Only facts. She slid the document toward me. The letter stated that I had never authorized the use of my separate assets, never agreed to guarantee Jason's loan, and requested that the lender disregard any representation suggesting otherwise. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just the truth. Rachel looked at me. Once this goes out, there isn't really a way back. I thought about Mark, about our wedding, about every Sunday morning we'd spent drinking coffee on the back patio. Then I remembered him telling me to apologize in my own dining room. Send it. She nodded once. Done. Mark texted me less than an hour later. Come home, we need to fix this. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another message appeared. You're humiliating this family. Still nothing. Then came the third. If you don't come home today, don't bother coming back. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I handed my phone to Rachel. She smiled slightly. He still thinks he's negotiating from a position of strength. Instead of replying, we finalized the divorce petition. Rachel filed it that afternoon. The retaliation came faster than I expected. By Tuesday evening, my phone stopped working. Mark had removed me from the family plan. The joint credit card declined when I tried buying groceries. When I drove to the house Wednesday evening to collect clothes for work, the garage keypad flashed red. Access denied. I stood in the driveway holding an empty garment bag while my knee throbbed from climbing in and out of the car. Across the street, Mr. Henderson watered his lawn. He politely pretended not to notice me standing outside my own home. I never felt smaller, not angry, just erased. Rachel arranged a formal property retrieval for Friday morning. I hated every minute of it. Walking through the front door with my attorney instead of my husband felt like visiting someone else's life. 3 weeks later, we sat in a mediation office in downtown Indianapolis. The conference room was plain. Gray carpet, cheap coffee, a clock that ticked much louder than it should have. Mark arrived with his attorney. Jason and Linda waited outside because they weren't parties to the divorce, though everyone knew the business loan was hanging over the meeting. The mediator encouraged us to speak openly. Mark began before anyone else. I never intended to hurt Claire. I almost smiled. Intentions had become his favorite hiding place. Rachel asked quietly, "Then why did you tell Jason that Claire had already agreed to support the purchase?" I assumed she would. "And why did you tell the lender family assets were available?" I believed they would be. "And why did you ask Claire not to ask questions?" Mark rubbed his forehead. Because every conversation turned into an argument. Rachel didn't raise her voice. So your solution was to make financial decisions first and explain them later? Mark looked toward me. I was protecting my son's future. Rachel answered before I could. By risking your wife's retirement. Silence. Then Mark said the sentence that finally ended the marriage in my mind. A decent wife would have helped. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I should have asked. Just another reminder that he believed my role was to cooperate. I looked at him across the conference table. For 7 years, I said calmly, I thought being a good wife meant sharing my life. I shook my head. You wanted me to share my assets. The mediator quietly made a note. The door suddenly opened. Linda stepped inside. Her attorney wasn't there. She wasn't supposed to be. I need 5 minutes. Nobody objected. She carried several printed emails. I spent 2 weeks deciding whether to bring these. She placed them on the table. They're from Mark. One email stopped me cold. It had been sent almost 18 months earlier, months before I sold my Broad Ripple condo. Mark had written to Linda, once Claire finally sells the condo and everything's under one roof, Jason's financing won't be a problem anymore. She won't walk away over his future. I read it twice. He'd been planning around my money long before I even knew Jason wanted to buy a business. Linda folded her arms. I don't like what happened. She looked directly at me. And I still think Jason depended on his father too much. Then she turned toward Mark. But you lied to every person in this room. Mark's shoulders dropped. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely tired. Jason came in next. He looked worse than he had at dinner. His loan had been suspended while the bank requested revised documentation. The seller had given him 10 business days to find new financing. I trusted Dad. Emily, who had quietly joined him, answered before anyone else. So did Claire. Jason looked down. I should have asked you myself. Yes, I said. You should have. No speeches, no yelling, just the truth. The mediation ended 3 hours later. Mark kept the Carmel house if he refinanced it in his own name. I kept my separate retirement accounts, my brokerage account, and reimbursement for a documented portion of the renovations I'd paid for. Most importantly, every document made one thing unmistakably clear. I had no responsibility for Jason's business transaction. As we walked toward the elevators, Mark caught up with me. I never thought you'd actually leave. I pressed the elevator button. I know. The doors opened. He waited for me to say something else. Instead, I stepped inside. As the doors began to close, I looked at the man I'd once imagined growing old beside. That, I said softly, was exactly why you believed you could make decisions for me. The doors closed between us. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, relief. 6 months after I walked out of that mediation office, I was living in a 2-bedroom condo just north of Broad Ripple. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was half the size of the one I'd left behind. The elevator made a strange humming sound every afternoon, and the refrigerator's ice maker seemed determined to wake me up every night around 2. Oddly enough, I loved the place. For the first time in years, every room belonged to me. Nobody rearranged my kitchen, nobody invited guests without asking, nobody volunteered my time or my money. The hardest part wasn't the divorce, it was rebuilding ordinary life. I had to switch my health insurance through work. I met with a financial planner and realized I'd have to postpone retirement by about 18 months because of attorney's fees and moving expenses. My knee still reminded me when the weather was changing. Some mornings, climbing the condo stairs during fire drill inspections felt like running a marathon. Starting over after 50 isn't romantic, it's paperwork, budget spreadsheets. Learning which grocery store has the shortest walk from the parking lot. Accepting that your body needs a little more patience than it used to. But every week became a little lighter. My neighbor Ruth convinced me to join her Tuesday morning book club. None of us talked very much about the books. Mostly we discussed grandchildren, aching backs, recipes, and whether the pharmacy had finally filled someone's prescription. It felt peaceful. Peace had become surprisingly valuable. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Mark refinanced the Carmel house. As promised in the settlement, I received reimbursement for the documented renovation costs I'd paid over the years. Not enough to make me wealthy, enough to make things fair. Fairness, I discovered, feels much quieter than revenge. I never heard what eventually happened to Henderson Lawn and Landscape. Jason lost the purchase. The seller found another buyer before Jason could secure replacement financing. No lawsuits, no dramatic courtroom scene, just an expensive lesson. One rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Jason. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, "Hi." His voice sounded older, not physically, emotionally. "Would you meet me? Just once." I hesitated. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "I think there is." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a Panera Bread near Nora, neutral territory, public, safe. Jason was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached. "I ordered coffee," he said. "I remembered you always take 1 cream." I smiled politely. "I drink it black now." He looked surprised. "I guess people really do change." They do. For a few moments, neither of us touched our drinks. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology." I waited, not because I wanted to make him uncomfortable, because apologies deserve enough silence to become honest. "I knew you hadn't signed anything." He looked down at the table. "Dad kept saying you would." After a while, I convinced myself that was basically the same thing. "No," I said gently. "It isn't." He nodded. "I know that now." He rubbed both hands together before continuing. "When I reached page 4 that night," he stopped. I realized my signature was underneath something I wanted to believe instead of something I actually knew. That sentence stayed with me. Sometimes people don't lie because they're evil. Sometimes they lie because the truth would force them to stop getting what they want. Jason looked me in the eye. "I treated you like part of Dad's financial plan, instead of part of the family." I appreciated that he didn't blame Mark, not completely. "I'm sorry." There it was. Simple. No excuses, no speeches. I accepted it. But acceptance isn't the same as forgetting. "I hope you understand," I said, "that things can't go back to the way they were." "I know. If we're ever going to have a relationship, it has to be a different one." He nodded immediately. "No money. No guilt. No surprise family meetings. And no assuming I'll eventually change my mind because someone else already made plans." A small smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." Before we left, he quietly added, "Emily made me come." I laughed. "I figured." She said if I couldn't apologize without Dad standing next to me, then I probably wasn't sorry. She's a smart woman. She married a slow learner. For the first time in a very long while, we both laughed. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply 2 adults acknowledging that rebuilding trust takes much longer than breaking it. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten note from Linda, only 3 sentences. I should have asked why Mark needed an audience before I agreed to become one. "I hope you find some peace. I intend to do the same. She never asked to meet, neither did I. Sometimes respect arrives long after friendship has become impossible." That was enough. Mark called exactly once after the divorce became final. He said the house felt empty. He asked whether counseling might still save us. I listened quietly. Then I asked one question. If I hadn't had a retirement account, if I hadn't sold my condo, would you still be asking me to come home? The silence lasted almost 10 seconds. He never answered. He didn't need to. Some questions close doors more gently than arguments ever could. Today, Sunday dinners look different. The dining table in my condo only seats 4 people. That used to bother me. Now I think it's exactly the right size. Ruth comes over sometimes. My sister visits often. A few months ago, Emily brought the grandchildren by after asking several days in advance. Jason came too. No speeches, no pretending the past never happened. Just dessert. One of the kids looked around my condo and asked, "Grandma Claire, why is your table so little?" I smiled. "Because this table only has room for people who were actually invited." The adults laughed. The children didn't understand. That was perfectly fine. Not every lesson belongs to the next generation. Some belong to ours. Looking back, people sometimes ask whether getting divorced at 55 was frightening. It was. There were nights I cried while unpacking boxes. There were mornings I missed the sound of another person making coffee. There were weeks when every bill felt heavier than it should have. But peace arrived slowly. Not because life became easier, because it became honest. I used to think boundaries were something you built after love disappeared. Now I believe they're how healthy love survives. The people who truly respect you don't resent your boundaries. They simply knock before they come in. If you've ever felt like you were only considered family when someone needed something from you, I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for spending this time with me. Please take good care of yourself.